Rachel Martinez had always been obsessed with radio signals. As a child, she would sit for hours in her bedroom, slowly turning the dial on her father's old shortwave radio, searching for voices from distant countries and mysterious transmissions that seemed to come from nowhere. Now at 32, she still carried that same fascination, but her equipment had evolved considerably. Her prized possession was a vintage Hallicrafters SX100 shortwave radio that she had restored herself, complete with a cracked frequency dial that bore unique markings she had added to identify promising frequency ranges. The radio had belonged to her grandfather, a former Navy radio man who had served during World War II. He had taught Rachel everything she knew about radio propagation, frequency hunting, and the art of pulling clear signals out of atmospheric noise. On this cold November evening in 2019, Rachel was climbing the rusted fire escape of an abandoned warehouse near the Brooklyn docks, her precious radio secured in a weatherproof case slung over her shoulder. She had chosen this location because it was far from the electromagnetic interference of the city, elevated enough to catch distant signals, and isolated enough that she could operate without interruption. The warehouse had been empty for years, a casualty of changing shipping patterns and urban development, but its sturdy concrete structure and 10-story height made it perfect for her purposes. Rachel had been tracking unusual signal patterns for weeks. Mysterious transmissions that appeared briefly on specific frequencies before disappearing completely. These weren't typical ham radio communications or commercial broadcasts. They used digital encoding methods that suggested government or military origins, but they appeared on frequencies that weren't officially allocated to any known agencies. Rachel's experience with radio had taught her to recognize the signatures of different types of transmissions. She could distinguish between military communications, intelligence agency traffic, commercial satellites, and amateur radio operators just by listening to the signal characteristics. But these mysterious transmissions were different from anything she had encountered before. They appeared at seemingly random times, lasted only a few minutes, and used encryption methods that were far more sophisticated than typical government communications. Rachel had tried to record these signals from her apartment, but the urban environment created too much interference. She needed elevation, isolation, and optimal atmospheric conditions to capture them clearly. The abandoned warehouse rooftop provided all three requirements, and weather conditions tonight were perfect for long-distance radio propagation. As Rachel reached the rooftop and began setting up her equipment, the New York City skyline stretched out before her like a glittering circuit board. The Statue of Liberty was visible in the distance, and the constant hum of traffic from the nearby expressway provided a steady background drone. Rachel had brought more than just her vintage shortwave radio tonight. She also carried a spectrum analyzer, digital recording equipment, and a laptop computer loaded with signal analysis software that she had developed herself during her years working as an electronics engineer. Rachel had always been gifted with technology, but radio had remained her passion even as her professional career moved into other areas. She set up her antenna system, a sophisticated arrangement of wire elements that she had designed to maximize reception across multiple frequency bands. The antenna was virtually invisible in the darkness, but it was precisely tuned to capture the weak signals that traveled thousands of miles through the atmosphere. Rachel connected her recording equipment and began the careful process of tuning across the frequency spectrum, searching for the mysterious transmissions that had been eluding her for weeks. For the first hour, Rachel heard only typical radio traffic, commercial broadcasts, amateur radio conversations, and the occasional burst of digital data from satellites and remote monitoring stations. But as atmospheric conditions changed with the cooling night air, she began to pick up signals from much more distant locations. She heard voices speaking in various languages, radio stations from South America and Europe, and the characteristic sounds of military communications systems. Rachel was methodically scanning through frequencies when she heard something that made her stop and adjust her headphones more carefully. It was a digital signal, but unlike anything she had heard before, the transmission was using a form of encryption that created a distinctive warbling sound when heard through standard radio equipment. Rachel quickly connected her laptop to the radio and began recording the signal while simultaneously running it through her analysis software. What she saw on her computer screen made her heart race with excitement and curiosity. The signal showed patterns that indicated extremely sophisticated encryption, far beyond what typical government agencies used for routine communications. As Rachel continued monitoring the frequency, she realized that these weren't random transmissions. They were following a precise schedule, appearing every 30 minutes for exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Someone was operating a highly organized communication network, and they were using frequencies and encryption methods that suggested this was not an official government operation. Rachel had studied enough about intelligence agencies and military communications to recognize that this level of sophistication and secrecy indicated something far more sensitive than routine diplomatic or military traffic. The timing was too precise, the encryption too advanced, and the frequency choices too carefully selected to be anything other than a covert intelligence operation. But whose operation was it? And why were they using frequencies that weren't officially allocated to any known intelligence agency? Rachel decided to settle in for a long night of monitoring, determined to record enough of these transmissions to begin analyzing their content and origins. She had brought coffee, snacks, and warm clothing, preparing for the possibility that she might need to stay on the rooftop for many hours to gather sufficient data. As the night progressed, Rachel began to notice patterns in the mysterious transmissions that revealed even more disturbing possibilities. The signals were coming from multiple locations, creating a complex network of communication nodes that spanned different continents. Her direction-finding equipment indicated that some signals originated from the eastern United States, others from somewhere in Central Europe, and still others from locations that appeared to be in the Middle East. This wasn't a single intelligence agency communicating with its field operatives. This was a coordinated network involving multiple organizations across different countries. Rachel's software was gradually breaking down the encryption, revealing fragments of the actual message content. What she saw made her realize she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The decoded fragments contained references to asset deployment, target elimination, and operational timeline modification. These weren't diplomatic communications or routine intelligence gathering reports. These were operational orders for what appeared to be covert activities involving violence and manipulation of international events. One decoded fragment particularly caught Rachel's attention. Network Falcon confirms readiness for Munich Protocol. Asset 7 ready for deployment against target designation Alpha 9. Timeline moved to November 15th. Eliminate traces per standard procedure Delta. Rachel stared at her computer screen, her hands trembling slightly as she realized what she was reading. This was operational traffic for what appeared to be an assassination plot scheduled to take place in just 3 days. Target designation Alpha 9 could be anyone, but the reference to Munich suggested this involved high-level international figures, possibly government officials or diplomatic personnel. Rachel quickly saved all her recordings and began cross-referencing the coded language against known intelligence terminology that she had researched during her years of radio monitoring. The more she analyzed, the more convinced she became that she had intercepted communications from a rogue intelligence network operating outside official government channels. These weren't NSA or CIA communications. These were messages from defectors, freelance operatives, or foreign intelligence services conducting unauthorized operations on American soil and abroad. As Rachel continued her analysis, another transmission provided even more shocking revelations. This one was longer and contained more detailed operational information that her software was able to decode more completely. The message read, "Shadownet control to all operational nodes. Phase 3 of Operation Prometheus initiated. Asset placement confirmed in target governments across 7 countries. Financial manipulation protocols active. Media influence campaigns proceeding according to schedule. Next phase requires elimination of oversight personnel who have become aware of network activities. Priority targets include Congressional Oversight Committee members, investigative journalists, and intelligence agency personnel not aligned with network objectives. Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November cold. She was reading about a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of multiple governments, involving financial manipulation, media control, and the systematic elimination of anyone who might expose their activities. This wasn't just a rogue intelligence operation. This was a shadow network attempting to manipulate world events from behind the scenes. The scope of the conspiracy became even clearer as Rachel decoded additional transmissions throughout the night. She learned that the network called itself Shadownet and operated through a combination of NSA defectors, European intelligence operatives, and freelance contractors from various countries. Their ultimate goal appeared to be the manipulation of international conflicts, financial markets, and political systems to create conditions that would benefit their hidden agenda. Rachel discovered references to operations in Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, and several African countries, where Shadownet operatives were apparently working to escalate or de-escalate conflicts according to their strategic objectives. They had assets placed within major financial institutions, media organizations, and government agencies across the Western world. The network was using their combined intelligence capabilities to predict and manipulate international events, essentially treating global politics as a chess game where they controlled many of the pieces. Rachel realized she had uncovered evidence of the most sophisticated conspiracy in modern history, one that made traditional spy novels seem naive by comparison. But the most terrifying aspect of what Rachel was learning concerned Shadownet's methods for maintaining secrecy and eliminating threats. As she decoded more transmissions, she found detailed discussions of assassination techniques, accident staging, and character assassination campaigns designed to discredit anyone who came too close to discovering their activities. The network had apparently been responsible for the deaths of several journalists and government officials over the past few years, deaths that had been attributed to accidents, suicides, or natural causes. Rachel saw references to specific names that she recognized from news reports. An investigative journalist who had died in a car accident while researching defense contractor corruption, a congressional aide who had committed suicide after being accused of sexual misconduct, and a State Department official who had suffered a fatal heart attack despite being in perfect health. According to the intercepted communications, all of these deaths had been orchestrated by Shadownet to prevent exposure of their activities. Rachel realized that her own discovery of their communication network had probably already put her life in danger. As dawn approached, Rachel had recorded hours of Shadownet communications and decoded enough content to understand the basic structure and objectives of their conspiracy. But she also realized that her presence on the rooftop might have been detected by the network's security protocols. Several of the later transmissions contained references to communication security breach and unknown monitoring activity detected. One particularly ominous message read, "Technical analysis indicates unauthorized interception of network traffic from New York metropolitan area. Initiate source identification and elimination protocols immediately. Asset deployment authorized for domestic operations." Rachel understood that Shadownet had realized someone was listening to their communications and had authorized lethal action to find and eliminate the source. She quickly packed her equipment and prepared to leave the rooftop. but she knew that simply escaping wouldn't solve her problem. Shadownet had the resources and capabilities to track her down eventually, and they had demonstrated their willingness to kill anyone who threatened their operations. Rachel faced the most difficult decision of her life as she climbed down from the warehouse rooftop. She could try to disappear and hope that Shadownet would never identify her as the source of the communication intercepts, or she could take the enormous risk of exposing what she had discovered and hope that public revelation would provide protection through visibility. Rachel chose exposure. She drove directly to the offices of a major news organization and demanded to speak with their most senior investigative journalist. She brought all her recordings, analysis, and documentation, along with her vintage shortwave radio, as proof of how she had obtained the information. The journalist, initially skeptical of what sounded like an elaborate conspiracy theory, became convinced when Rachel played the decoded transmissions and demonstrated the sophisticated analysis that supported her conclusions. Within hours, additional journalists and technical experts were brought in to verify Rachel's findings and prepare them for publication. The news organization also contacted federal law enforcement agencies, providing them with copies of all the intercepted communications and evidence of the assassination plots that were apparently scheduled to take place in the coming days. The publication of Rachel's discoveries created immediate international chaos. Government agencies in multiple countries were forced to acknowledge that their communications security had been compromised and that rogue networks were operating within their intelligence services. The references to specific assassination plots led to emergency security measures for high-ranking officials in several countries. Financial markets crashed as investors realized that major international events had been artificially manipulated by hidden conspirators. Media organizations worldwide scrambled to investigate their own potential infiltration by Shadownet operatives. Congressional hearings were immediately scheduled to investigate how such a vast conspiracy could have operated undetected within American intelligence agencies. Several high-ranking NSA officials resigned under suspicion of involvement with the network, and European governments began their own investigations into the extent of Shadownet penetration within their intelligence services. Rachel's vintage shortwave radio, with its cracked dial and unique frequency markings, became a symbol of how individual citizens could still uncover truths that powerful organizations tried to hide. But Rachel's victory came at an enormous personal cost. Despite the public attention that provided some protection, she received constant death threats and had to live under federal protection. Several attempts were made on her life, including a car bombing that she survived only because she had changed her routine at the last minute. Shadownet operatives who weren't captured in the initial investigations continued their efforts to silence her, viewing her as the primary threat to their remaining operations. Rachel was forced to change her identity and relocate multiple times, essentially becoming a prisoner of the security measures necessary to keep her alive. Her old life as an electronics engineer and amateur radio enthusiast was gone forever, replaced by the constant fear and isolation that came with being the person who had exposed one of history's most dangerous conspiracies. But Rachel found comfort in knowing that her discovery had prevented numerous assassinations, exposed financial manipulation that had been stealing billions from ordinary citizens, and revealed the existence of a shadow network that had been subverting democratic governments around the world. Her grandfather's old radio had helped her uncover a truth that changed the course of history, proving that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected sources.